Hi, my name is Jillian Flexner, and I am the founder and president of the Fresh Squeezed Opera Company. Welcome to our final for this week of our Fresh Squeezed Conversations this evening with Omar Najmi. Before we begin, I just wanted to ask that you consider supporting the Fresh Squeezed Opera Company, our composers, our musicians, and our artists. Help us to create new music and tell important stories. And without further ado, here is Victoria Benson.
Good evening, everybody. Happy Friday. Thank you, Jillian, for that great intro. Tonight, we are speaking with Omar Najmi. Omar and I went to Ithaca College together, and we are very excited to discuss his new work. He's an opera composer, and he is coming to us tonight from Boston, just outside of Boston. Hi, Omar.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
Good. I'm so glad you're here joining us tonight to talk about your new work and the operas that you've been writing.
Absolutely.
How did you discover that you were a composer?
Kind of by chance, honestly. 4 years ago now, 2016, my husband Brendan and I were talking about a project of putting together an opera, and I wasn't planning on writing originally. We thought about reaching out to some of our composer friends, seeing if anyone had something they were working on that they wanted a sort of platform to do. And ultimately, we weren't able to find the right project, and we sort of just floated the idea, what if we created something? And I jumped into that kind of thinking this was just something I do for fun. And it was one of those things where I started working on it. I was a young artist as a singer at Opera Colorado at the time, and I was working on my opera on the side. And I very quickly realized, oh my gosh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I mean, I don't really believe in supposed to be doing in that sense, but I was so kind of set on the singer track for a long time. I almost didn't dare utter into the universe yet my realization that my skill set and sort of where my heart was at led me right to writing my own music. And the rest, it kind of just happened through the process of writing my first opera, Adios, which I wrote and produced about a year ago. And since then, that has just continued to lead to other things. And I am so glad that composition has become a dual part of my professional musical life while I do continue singing as well.
So your first composition was an opera?
Essentially, yes. I mean, I had dabbled back at Ithaca. I think for our opera workshop, this was after you had graduated, and Brian Damaris was running the opera programs there. And we had a little project in Op Shop that was to take one of the characters that we were portraying in our scenes, and one of the options we had was to write an aria from their perspective. So I did that then, and I remember everyone kind of being, wow, isn't even the right word, almost like baffled, like, oh.
A singer can do that?
So that was sort of my first dipping my toes in, and I fiddled around for years. But yeah, really, I just started writing a 3-act opera, and that was that.
You don't want to start small, do you, Omar?
No.
Do you think that your education as a singer and the work that you had done as a singer professionally kind of made it seem like the obstacle of tackling an opera was something that you could take on with confidence?
Absolutely. I was really standing on the shoulders of giants. I was working on a production of Puccini's Fanciulla del West at the time, and I definitely felt like Puccini was one of my strong guides as I wrote this opera, not necessarily in terms of like the sound world, but in terms of dramatic structure and how I used music to tell and advance the story. So in that aspect, just being exposed to so many different kinds of operas over the course of my singing life definitely influenced me. But the other piece of it that was hugely helpful was just, as a singer, I have worked on a lot of new music. It's been sort of one of the core parts of my singing career. And the sort of industry connections I had through that work made me feel, I don't know what the right word is, more secure jumping into something like this, knowing that I have people who already know me, even if they don't know my work as a composer. they know me as a musician, they'd be interested to hear what I have to say. And I did, definitely utilize those connections to help get word out there about my music and build this career for myself.
We've been asking some of our composers about the role that mentorship has played in their growth as composers. So it sounds like did you have any mentors? It sounds like you used a lot of peer support in order to get you where you were.
Yeah, I definitely do not have any sort of direct mentorship situation, particularly given that I haven't been through any kind of formal degree program in composition. But what I do have are a large network of excellent colleagues who I really consider friends, who have acted as mentors for me in various ways. People who I've worked with in the field as a singer, who I reached out to when I first started writing enlarged, adios. One of my big questions was how to go about pursuing the rights to the play that I was basing it off of, which was not in the public domain. That was this like big looming thing that I couldn't even figure out how to begin. And so I reached out to a few people, including Jeremy Howard Beck, who is a fantastic composer, and he had written The Long Walk, which I had been an understudy in the premiere of it shortly before. And I knew that was a piece that was based off of a book. It was based off of a current book. So I was just curious, what is the process of reaching out? What can you expect in terms of, sort of the financial situation around that? He was very helpful.
And what was that process like for you?
It is ongoing. One of the really added snags is just, it's a Spanish play. And so it's just communicating in my second language, which is, I feel very comfortable conversing in Spanish. I don't necessarily feel comfortable with like formal business and contractual language in Spanish. I mean,
sure.
I hardly do in English. I'm only just getting there. So that's been sort of one of the challenges. And one of the things I've run into with people who aren't sort of an active part of the opera world is just sort of getting on the same page with the terminology and how our productions work. That when I'm looking for the rights to this piece, I'm really looking for the underlying rights on an ongoing basis for the rest of time for other companies to be able to do this piece. And I think oftentimes the way the folks I've been dealing with have wanted to think of it is, well, tell us about the production you're doing and we'll give you the rights for that. And from my perspective,
a film, like a one-time thing, and then it exists, and that's
right,
it.
Right. Or like if you're a theater company saying we want the rights to do Les Mis or something, just for this one production. Mm-hmm. So that's been sort of one of the hurdles, just to sort of get some mutual understanding on that, and it is still a work in progress. So basically, with my initial production of Ardiente, I did come to a short-term agreement just for that one production, with the understanding that they charged me a very, very modest flat fee for that, and then with the agreement that we would talk afterward, depending on what the trajectory of this piece was, because I think what's typical is then there'll be some kind of percentage-based thing that you'll work out. But yeah.
So you were, in your first opera, composer, singer, producer,
yes.
librettist.
I can't really call myself librettist. I did adapt the libretto, but I basically took it verbatim from the play, and all I did was cut. You have to make cuts when taking a full-length play and turning it into music, because singing just takes up more time than speaking.
Yeah.
And that was hard to do. I loved this play. Again, it's called En la ardiente oscuridad by Antonio Buero Vallejo. And it's part of the reason why I didn't use the translation either. There is an existing English translation, but I just love the language. It was hard to decide to cut anything. And that was most of my role as librettist, was figuring out how do we tighten up the story, but keep the bones of what make it work. And I'm quite happy with what I came up with in the end.
So talk a little bit about setting the Spanish text, because, as singers, you don't really learn the Spanish language when you're learning, diction or even repertoire. It's really zarzuela. That's kind of it. So how did you approach that?
Absolutely. The Spanish language has always been my sort of very strong second language. So as a singer, I mean, I've studied Italian, French, and German to varying degrees, but I studied Spanish in high school, and then while I was at Ithaca, actually, I was living in a Spanish-speaking dorm while I was there because I wanted to keep up practicing the language. So it's always been kind of an important part of my life. I also spent 2 summers doing some voluntourism work in Honduras, in rural areas where it really was complete immersion. In terms of setting it to music, it was actually great. It's such a beautiful, singable language. One of the other reasons also why I decided not to work with the English translation. It's so great setting Spanish. And, a lot of times, like, to an American listening to Italian and Spanish, they both have a similar kind of feel, but it was actually quite different setting it. And it was interesting how the Spanish language sort of determined, because, and I'm sure you'll ask me about this later, but I'm very much a words first composer. Everything I write comes, like, the genesis is from the words. And the language really dictated a lot of my rhythmic writing. And the Spanish language, particularly in this play, which is archaic is too strong a word, but it's like it's formal language, not quite like Shakespearean,
Sure.
But it was written in the 40s.
It's not like you're going to hear this type of language if you go to a Spanish-speaking country.
Right, absolutely, yeah. There were things that even the native Spanish-speaking members of my cast would have to ask, oh, what does this mean?
Mm-hmm.
Also because the play is from Spain specifically, and some of it was sort of Spain-specific language and linguistics. But yeah, I found that there was a lot of sort of broad triplets, a lot of ties over bar lines, not a lot of kind of strong rhythmic on the beat stuff like you might get in German, in English.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it made
Plus you get those long vowels.
Yeah.
Vowels at the ends of words. Singers love that. So as somebody who didn't receive formal training in composition, what were the tools that you used, either technical tools or, methodological tools that you used to help you compose this opera?
That's a good question. The short answer that I'm almost embarrassed to say, but is trial and error. I mean, it's just like jump in and try some things out was definitely how I started going about this. That said, I mean, at the point when I started writing this opera, I already had a large toolbox from my extensive music theory training. And then also, one of the things that I always remember, one of my, you asked about mentors, and one other person I should mention, one of my best friends in the world, who, I don't know if you remember her, she was also an Ithaca alum. She was in my class as a double major in voice and composition, Laura Intravia.
Yeah, I remember Laura. I sang some of her music.
Yeah, so
yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic composer, fantastic singer, and multi-instrumentalist. And we had talked over the years, and I remember she has some composition students, and one of the things she would talk about imparting to her students that I really took to heart was the importance of what's the word, to avoid like the kind of analysis paralysis that you get from pursuing perfection, the importance of just getting something down, anything down. Mm-hmm. Sometimes she would start her new students with let's just do a theme and variations, because it's like there's a concrete form to it, and you could take that and just write something. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I did that a lot through this opera. I would just like decide, I'm going to go full speed ahead. I'm going to write something down. If I need to go back later and change it, that's fine. But I'm not going to sit here and stare at a blank page for a long time. And that was one of the most important things for me, because you'd be surprised by what sorts of things sort of are already, at least for me, are already lurking in my subconscious. I go sit down. And also this particular play, I read it in high school, and it made a huge impression on me. And so the words of this play, I had sort of rediscovered it before I wrote the opera.
They were lurking in your brain for a long time.
I had ideas about exactly who all of these characters were. I had these just feelings about what they would sound like, what their sort of the different feel and tempo of their music would be. But definitely, yeah, just getting stuff down on the page was important. And then giving myself arbitrary timelines, and not so arbitrary ones. When my husband Brendan and I decided we were going to produce the piece, we kind of just said, okay, we're deciding that it's going to happen in the fall of 2019. And thank God we said fall of 2019 and not 2020. But that really put my feet to the fire. It was then I had a year to finish a 3-act opera. And then I was like, in deep, and especially once I successfully became the recipient of a grant to support it, then I was really like, okay, I'm all in.
You really have to make something. That's great. Well, I am very excited to share with our audience tonight a clip from your 2019 production of En la ardiente oscuridad.
¿Dónde vas? A mi casa. Adiós. Pero Ignacio, si vas a estudiar con nosotros. He cambiado de parecer. En una hora es suficiente. No te dejes llevar de este impulso irrazonable. ¿Qué dirá Don Pablo? Don Pablo. Y nosotros, todos nosotros, nos sentiremos de conseguiremos ya como un compañero, un buen compañero con quien pasar alegremente un curso inolvidable. Calla, todos tenéis en la tierra de cristal. Y tú también, una primera. Alegremente es la palabra de la casa. Estáis envenenados de alegría. Pobre Ignacio, digas pena. Guárdate tu pena. No te enfades, estoy atrado de casa. Todos hemos vivido momentos semejantes, pero eso concluye un día. Y yo seré entero. Si me escuchas con tranquilidad, te diré cuál es. Estoy tranquilo.
Just a small clip from a 3-act opera, and you may recognize Omar there performing.
It's so great to revisit that right now. And I have to say, I'm just going to butt in here and give a couple of shout outs. That was my amazing husband, Brendan Shapiro, playing piano, and I could not have done any of this production without him. And also soprano Kelly Hollis in the role of Juana.
Yeah, and that's available for people to watch on your website, omarnajmi.com, which is great. And tell us a little bit about, what happened after 2019 and what your relationship is to your opera now that it is finished.
Yeah, so it was actually before, I think it was actually, it might have been before we did the production. We went, we being Brendan and I, went to sort of sell the piece to a few other companies, including the Phoenicia International Festival of the Voice. So the Phoenicia Festival of the Voice is a summer festival in the Catskills, and it actually happens to be right where Brendan grew up. And it's kind of in this rural, middle of nowhere area that you would never guess there'd be this like international opera festival there that, I mean, they bring in for their main productions. I mean, you've been there.
Yeah, I have. It's a beautiful place and a wonderful festival.
Stars, singers from the Met. So it's a really cool thing that's going on there. So we went to meet with Louis Odi and Maria Tadaro, who run the festival, to present this piece to them. We had already been in touch with them because they're sort of connected to an area that Brendan was connected to about just getting involved there over the summer at some point with some kind of project, but we hadn't ever thought about bringing an entire opera to them. And we knew this was going out on a limb, because what it takes for a company to commit to doing a 3-act opera, and particularly a brand new piece, that's a lot. So we were really thrilled that we met them in their office, sang through a bunch of arias for them, talked to them about the story, about why it's significant, why now is a great time to tell it, how it could pair with their planned season of Tosca was their main stage opera. And we were sort of like looking at these aspects of, so no one can probably tell from seeing that little snippet of it, but Ardiente the play was written under Franco's rule of Spain, and among the sort of themes of the piece is this theme of fascism and authority and what that means and how people navigate that and power conflicts between people. So we thought that could pair, and Maria and Louis at the Phoenicia Festival thought that could pair really nicely with Tosca, that also deals with sort of fascist dictatorship. Then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and they all but had to cancel their season. They were actually amazingly able to still do their production of Tosca,
Yeah.
but they had to take everything else in their festival and postpone it. So fingers crossed, we're doing it next summer.
All right, that's great. And we'll be putting up the links to the Phoenicia Festival as well in our show notes.
Awesome.
So now that you get to live on with your work and perform it, now that you finished it, are you working on anything else right now?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a lot right now. One of the, I don't want to say benefits of the pandemic, because that feels crass given the tragedy nationally right now, but it has really given me a lot of time to focus on my composition, since that's something I can do remotely from home. And since, for the most part, I actually am doing some singing right now, recording projects, but for the most part, stages are silent. So I've been working on a lot. I was just brought on board with the Boston Lyric Opera, where I've had a close relationship with them as a singer, and they've brought me on as their first ever emerging artist composer this year.
Great.
So I'm really excited. I'm working on a brand new project with them, and I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about it yet. So I'll
it's a secret.
a little vague here, but the culmination of this will be I'm working on a new song cycle with an amazing young poet. So I'm very, very excited about that. And I'm also working on a new opera right now.
Great.
Actually, this was almost a year ago now. Over a year ago now, I started the brainstorming process for my newest opera called This Is Not That Dawn. I was looking for a new project to work on, and there were a few programs that I was submitting a proposal to. And my father actually had recommended to me kind of offhand. I don't usually take career advice from my parents because neither of them are musicians. But he said, you should write an opera about partition, about the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947. And I thought, actually, that's a fantastic idea. It's untapped territory that, as far as I know, hasn't really been touched on in opera. Anyone correct me if I'm wrong. And it's something that I think, one, leaves room for operatic storytelling. One of my main considerations when I'm thinking about what sorts of things to set as operas is what wants to be an opera. I don't think everything needs to be an opera. There are some stories that just work really well in other mediums. Certain things just work really well as a straight play and they don't want music. There's a certain larger than lifeness to a story that I feel like opera singing really works for. So I thought about partition in India and in what is today Pakistan, and how much drama and tragedy there is there, and how many specific, unique stories that there were that different people took away from this sort of tragic moment in history. But the other piece of it that made me really interested about doing this is that enough time has passed since then, and yet we still have these tensions between India and Pakistan. We still have the sort of specter of British colonial rule, and really worldwide. And I don't want to get too off course here, but as we look at geopolitics, how much of what we're seeing today are results of imperial Europe?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
They head abroad and when they left. So I think it's really time to talk about that, to talk about what did it mean? What was the West's role in
the ripples of those events, they kind of hit the audience now in a modern way. I think it's great, and I'm really excited to share with our audience tonight a clip. Can you talk about the clip that we're going to be listening to?
Yeah, absolutely. So for This Is Not That Dawn, I am currently writing the libretto myself, which is new territory for me. But for this one scene, this is the final scene of the entire opera, and I wanted to use this poem called Subh-e Azadi. It is the dawn of independence, or the dawn of freedom. This is by very famous Pakistani poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz, and I've actually been in touch with his family about using this poem in my opera, and also using the title. So the title, This Is Not That Dawn, comes from a translation of a line in this poem. And basically the gist of it is he wrote this poem during partition, and he was really horrified to see the sort of violence, the way the subcontinent was coming apart. And he basically wrote in this poem, like, this tarnished light, this night smudged dawn, is this really the dawn that we wanted for? Is this really what we were striving for and waiting for? So in this final scene, I have the sort of ensemble singing the text of that poem, while on top of it, our two lead sopranos are. So I'm just going to give a tiny bit of background on the story here. It's a fractured narrative, and we have a mother, Mira, and her daughter, Anita, who were separated during partition. And we see part of the story is Mira's story back in the 40s. And part of the story is 30 years later, when Anita, who was raised in England, is traveling back to India to try to find out what happened to her mother. And so in this final scene, we're seeing both of their stories at once, while Mira is getting ready to board the train to Pakistan to find her beloved Bilal, who emigrated with his family. And Anita has just finished this trip and didn't really get the answers she was looking for, and she's getting on the train to basically head back to the airport. So they're both kind of ships passing in the night here, while the chorus sings this poem. So enjoy.
Let's take a listen. Thanks for sharing that with us, Omar.
My pleasure.
And I want to take a minute to let all of our audience members know that Omar is participating in a program called Aperture with West Edge Opera, where a bunch of different composers and librettists are sharing the creation process with the members of the streaming service that you can sign up for. And there are lots of different entry points, different price points for people to participate, and then possibly select who gets commissioned. So everybody should definitely go take a look at West Edge Opera. We're going to put a link there in our show notes to check out Aperture, and maybe we'll be able to see Omar's new opera again soon. Omar, we've reached the end of our conversation tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been really great to catch up with you again. And is there anywhere where our audience can find you?
Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned my website is the best place to find me. It's omarnajmi.com. Yeah, that's probably the best place to look.
Great. Well, thanks again, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in for all of the conversations this week, and we hope to continue them going forward. So if you would like, please donate to Fresh Squeezed Opera, and we will see you all again soon. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.